It is Wednesday. It is 1 p.m. Welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're so happy to have you with us here today, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Go ahead and jump in onto our chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today. Tell us what's happening in your district. If your kids are back into the classroom, we definitely want to hear that. Edgar, how are you today?
Good, Naj. Great to be back. And I know because our viewers are really interested in your backgrounds. They always say, they're always very curious where in the world is Naj today. I see you have a different background that looks a little familiar. I vaguely remember that background.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
It's a bittersweet day here in the Alikhan family, that's for sure. As most of our viewers know, I normally am in a classroom setting. I've been blessed to have the opportunity to broadcast from my wife's kindergarten classroom. So I'm missing her today. The reason that I no longer have that broadcast location is because her kids are back tomorrow, which is great. It's very exciting. Edgar, it's something that we have been seeing around the state. We're hearing more and more of these stories. And Edgar, I know that your kids are going into a district where they're getting ready to open school. So this is certainly like a really great time, and it's a refreshing time here in public education.
Yeah, the fact that you got kicked out of your broadcast location or students going back to classrooms, I'm all for it. So yeah, I'm glad you got kicked out. Now, like you said, I think it's been great being in meetings with our members or just in these different forums, and just the outpouring of enthusiasm and just them sharing their feelings about not just their feelings, but more importantly, the feelings of students being back with each other, being back in classrooms. And like we keep reiterating, it's been such a long journey. It's been such a long year in many respects. And we know the amount of hours our school leaders and their teams and their teachers and their classified employees have put in to make this happen. So yeah, no, it's definitely happy days in ACSA land, right? There's still some we're moving along, here in Sacramento, but Sacramento has now a reopen date as well. So there's definitely been a lot of good news on that front.
Yeah, certainly is. I want to say hello to Maria Thompson, Gary Reller, Ellen Wheeler, Christine, Mary, Aaron. So good to have all of you guys here. Grant Bennett, Edgar's old superintendent, joining us, as well as Michelle and Victor. So good to have you guys with us. Again, go ahead and jump onto the chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. Edgar, we've got a really big show today, and we're working our way towards an interview with Ben Churchill, the superintendent from Carlsbad Unified. We're going to talk to him about the physical distancing guidelines, because he and a whole group of superintendents in Southern California, specifically San Diego area, were really pushing for manipulations to those CDPH guidelines and the physical distancing guidelines. So we'll talk about that with Ben in just a couple of moments. I also want to let you know, coming up in the 2 o'clock hour, we're going to have a message that comes to all of our ACSA members on email from our president, Ron Williams, who watches our show, participates every single week. This is going to be on the Asian American Pacific Islander racism situation that we've been having here in the U.S. Edgar, I know that ACSA, and I'll have you speak to this, ACSA has been one of those organizations where we've not just talked about student advocacy, but equity as well. And we're an organization that doesn't just kind of talk about it. We actually do the activities that are involved. It's one thing to put out a statement. It's another thing to actually be going out and doing the work, the important work. And that's opened up a seat at the table for us in school communities and in the state capitol. And Edgar, I know you have a lot of conversations with administrators out there about the impact of equity work and making a difference out there in the community.
Yeah, I think that in the last year, obviously, so much of our focus has been COVID and the impacts of the pandemic on our members, on our students, on our communities. But then right alongside there, I mean, we've had to deal, kind of hit us right in the face, these issues around racial equity, racial injustice, the George Floyd situation that we spent a lot of time talking about last year. As you allude to here, unfortunately, in the last number of days, we've had these issues of issues as it pertains to Asian Americans and some of the impact that things happening around the country has had on them. And I think like you mentioned, I think we've been really careful. Every organization, strives to, okay, we got to say the right thing. We got to put out a message. But before we jump out and say something, what are we going to do about it, right? And whether that mean helping educate our own staff. We've done a lot of efforts here internally at ACSA to have these conversations about implicit bias, providing resources to our members with ultimately the goal of them passing that along to not only their teams, but again, to students. So I think we've always tried to find that right balance of, yes, let's rush to say something, but are those words, as you said, going to be backed with real actions?
Yeah, and Ron is going to talk specifically about some activities that ACSA is going to be leading, activities that everybody can participate in, just because we're in the situation right now where there's been a lot of racism out there for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. These are activities that everybody is invited to participate in. So we definitely want to alert you to that. That's coming up in the 2:00 hour. Also, Edgar, you and I have been monitoring this all morning. Cindy Marten, the superintendent from San Diego Unified School District, she is a nominee for Deputy Secretary of Education. This is video from earlier today from her confirmation hearing. And I know you and I were talking about this, how unique it is to see an ACSA member, a longtime California educator, in that seat, interacting with some of those same people that we've been hearing about on the news through election cycles, all of that over the last, 6 to 12 months.
Oh yeah, no, I think it was a moment of pride for all of us that have got a chance to work and know Cindy over the number of years. To your point, seeing Cindy in that chair and I think grilled is an appropriate term. She did very well, by the way. She held her own, was very polished in terms of having responses. As anyone might imagine, seeing these confirmation hearings, no matter how great the candidate is, they will come in with strong questions. You see Susan Collins there on the screen, and it was surreal to see the Susan Collinses of the world, or the Mitt Romneys, the Patty Murrays of the world, here having this back and forth with Cindy Marten, right? Somebody that many of us have had to work with. So she represented California administrators very well. Yeah. She represented the superintendency very well, and they didn't take a final vote yet. They're still giving some room for some initial back and forth with the members or some questions in writing. I don't believe they've set a final date for first to vote this recommendation out of the committee. This was the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in the Senate. They will ultimately send a recommendation to the full Senate. But Cindy did great, and it was a proud moment for all of us who have had a chance to work with her.
Yeah, certainly. Again, go ahead and jump into our chat. I see Butch Seifert. I don't know, Butch, if I have ever seen you drop in on our chat. So good to have you with us. Donna and Jennifer. Sue Kaiser's with us. Michelle. Mohammed Warad is back with us after several weeks being away. And I know he's just gotten off a meeting that ended at 1:00, so you can see his dedication to joining our show. One other piece, Edgar, before we get to our main topic today. Attorney General here in California, you are hearing that we may hear something coming up about the AG selection sometime today. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of rumor mill is swirling today on a number of fronts in Sacramento, but notably we might expect at 2:00 that the governor may announce our new attorney general. Again, the seat was vacated by Javier Becerra, who's now the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Biden administration. So there's still some names, there's some back and forth about, there's been headlines about people who are in contention, who are no longer in contention, that they've been notified, but we're expecting an announcement on that potentially this afternoon.
And our great member, Craig Wheaton, if you go ahead and jump and look in the chat, he's responding to us over from Facebook today, talking about just getting off the phone with Cindy Marten, who we just mentioned a few moments ago is in a confirmation hearing for Deputy Secretary of Education under the Biden administration. So Craig's clearly in communication with her as this is going on. Let's go ahead and move to our topic, Edgar, because last week we had an eventful week. CDC updated their guidelines on physical distancing inside of classrooms. That led to, on Saturday, the governor releasing new guidelines on physical distancing here in California. A lot changing, Edgar, just over those 2 or 3 days. Your assessment on what you were seeing with the changes first from the federal government and then here in the state of California.
Well, again, not to beat a dead horse here, but I actually think our members were in large part of this conversation. And we're going to have obviously an example here with our guest about our members raising their voices on this issue. But we've been hearing this for months, right? Here on every Wednesday about how important these changes to the physical distancing requirements were going to be to do a number of things, to transition kids out of hybrids, to be able to expand secondary options for in-person learning for our students. And we've said it many times that this was going to be our number one priority and that we were going to push. And we started to push. And I think the administration heard not only us, more importantly, heard our members. They saw what some of the implications were. I have to tell you, this materialized a lot quicker than I thought it was going to be. Here, I thought we're in for another fight after the SB 86. We're going to have to push. And lo and behold, I think it kind of snowballed. And I think some of it is driven by what we're going to talk about here in a second with this court order that came out of San Diego, coupled with just the reality that's out there in the field, that these changes were going to be required to expand that. It didn't hurt, again, that the CDC at the same time, this was nice timing, they were reviewing some science, that there has been some new studies, nobody went out of Massachusetts, that was saying with the right mitigation efforts in place, you could keep students at 3 feet of distancing. So I think it all came together, and it came together quick, I think, for the good.
Yeah. So let's talk about that court action. Joining us today here on the show, Ben Churchill, Superintendent, Carlsbad Unified School District down in Southern California. Ben, so good to have you with us on the show. I want to ask you right off the start here. You and some of your colleagues very much in the news over the last few weeks, given this significant court decision. Can you bring viewers up to date, up to speed on how things came about and where we're at right now?
Sure thing. Thanks. And I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of our story. We have been involved in a lawsuit brought by a group of parents here in North County, San Diego, who named our districts as co-defendants. Their primary defendant was the state of California. And that issue here really has been the plaintiff's argument that the state has put together too restrictive a set of rules for schools ever to be able to reopen. We were named as nominal defendants, but in many ways we've agreed with the plaintiff's argument that we need to relax some of these rules in order to bring kids back onto campus. So we had a hearing maybe 2 weeks ago wherein the judge issued a temporary restraining order stating that CDPH could not enforce several key provisions of the January 20th guidance. Among those provisions, the judge was looking at the difference between elementary and secondary schools while in the purple tier, and the judge was looking at the physical distancing requirements. Part of the TRO, temporary restraining order, was to restrict the state from enforcing those provisions. So until we get to the next hearing, which is now scheduled for April 8th, the state is not able to enforce the January 2021 physical distancing requirements.
Hey, Ben, so thanks for that update. I know you've been in the thick of it, and we appreciate just keeping all of us informed as this is played out. So tell us a little bit about, one, not just the status of obviously where we're at, and you just alluded to it right now about next steps, but what's been taking place in your community all along? You know, like I know you guys, this with the parents, the impetus there was to try to get kids back into classrooms. So kind of play out where you guys are, not just on the court order, but also as a community in terms of all of this.
Yeah, like my colleagues across the state, we've seen a real divide in our community. We've seen groups of parents and teachers and students who are most comfortable with a distance learning option, staying at home. And then we've seen a group that is really pushing for as much in-person instruction as quickly as possible. So here in Carlsbad, we brought our elementary students back in a hybrid model at the end of September. They've been on campus since September 28th. That's K through 5 here in our district. In the middle of January, we moved to a 5-day-a-week model for our elementary students, and that's been really successful. Our middle schools and high schools did not open while San Diego County was in the red tier. So we were closed throughout the purple tier. San Diego County came out last Wednesday, and on Thursday, we brought back our middle school and high school students in a hybrid model. Parents have been asking for more than the hybrid model. Parents have been asking for a 5-day-a-week model. And we've been telling them that as long as a 4 to 6 foot requirement between students is in place, there's no way we can bring back students for more than the 2 days a week we're doing right now. As you mentioned earlier, it really snowballed over the last 4 or 5 days, really, with the CDC coming out and then CDPH on Saturday changing the distancing requirements, making them recommendations instead of requirements, gives us now the ability to bring more students back. In terms of the community, we have a board meeting tonight, in fact, to make some decisions. But we do hear many folks are very happy with the distance learning options that we've made available over the course of the year. And now a group of parents is happy that we may have the opportunity to bring our older students back 5 days a week.
Well, one thing if I could add, that I think Ben reminds me of, and actually we didn't say it at the when we got going with this conversation, is one interesting piece about the CDC, and we've gotten this question over the last couple of days. The CDC made a recommendation, obviously, of 3 feet based on the studies, as we talked about. Now they did it. Now remember, the CDC they don't have the ability to make any rules or requirements. It's their recommendations to the field. And their recommendations actually did say 3 to 6, 3 feet, that they were strongly recommending 3 feet for all grades. They did know, obviously, some distinctions for in communities with higher transmission that it could be 6 feet. And there's some other caveats. Now, interesting with the CDPH, the California guidance, and I think it's this issue that Ben talked about. I actually think it's one of the most significant pieces that, as folks may remember, the old guideline said a minimum of 4 to 6 feet. This CDPH guidance, as it came out Saturday, and I know Gianna will post it there on our chat, it actually says it strongly recommends 3 feet. And I think this is a direct result. I mean, this is my own analysis, that this is a direct result of what was transpiring on the court battle, because I think the judge, at least initially, invalidated the authority for the state to actually set that as a firm requirement. So not only did they change the distance, they changed from a minimum to quote unquote strongly recommend, which I think is actually a very noteworthy change there.
And Gianna Miller, as Edgar just mentioned, has put that link over there in the chat. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at that, do that after the show is done. Go ahead. Don't do that at this moment. Ben, Edgar, both of you talked about the CDC and the CDPH changes from over the weekend. Ben, how do those changes as far as physical distancing requirements impact what has happened in San Diego and what will happen? What are you and your colleagues talking about as we move forward with this?
Yeah, it's very interesting that the CDPH guidance now is in direct alignment with the judge's temporary restraining order, which says that the state can't enforce physical distancing requirements. It's very meaningful for us because it now gives us the ability to plan to bring more kids back onto campus. We know, and many of my colleagues around the state know this as well, we know that with a robust a bundle of mitigation strategies, that students can be safe on campus. We can mitigate the spread of the virus on our campuses by layering strategies on top of one another. So masks, universal mask wearing is a non-negotiable for us. We've invested in HEPA filtration units in our classrooms. We've upgraded to MERV 13 filters. We've increased airflow in our classrooms. Those layers help us then to say our kids are still going to be safe, even if they are 3 feet apart. You don't need the extreme physical distancing to have an effective mitigation of virus transmission on your campuses. So the CDPH relaxation has really opened the door for us to bring back more students. We've been clear, we're not going to cram as many kids into a classroom as possible, right? We're going to do the best we can to continue to have distancing in classrooms. And then certainly when they're out and about on campus, at meal times especially, there are lots of times when a 6 foot minimum is necessary. But we believe in the classroom kids are safe with a layered mitigation strategy approach.
I want to remind you guys, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat. Say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Also want to encourage all of you to subscribe to our videos on YouTube and go ahead and follow us on Facebook. Right now, I'm being told by our staff behind the scenes, we are closing in on 2,000 subscribers. We're about 125 away. So go ahead and subscribe. You'll get information as it's happening whenever there's a live broadcast coming up here. Edgar?
Yeah, Ben, so the one thing that's heavy on everybody's mind right now, and you alluded to it, your board is going to meet tonight. You guys making decisions, not just here for the end of the academic year, but now starting to look toward the next year, right? And with so much changing, as a school leader, how are you dealing with that, right? And even though it seems by the day, there's another piece for the CDPH guidance on distancing. I know last week a big conversation was here on the chat was around the guidance on sports and how one day they say certain folks can attend. And I think we were talking about cheerleading last week. The very next day they change it. The landscape continues to change, right? On a weekly basis, on a daily basis. How is that impacting your planning for I say fall, with the acknowledgement that most schools now start in the summer? How's that affecting your planning? And what are you looking out for as a school leader in terms of the state? What information are you going to need to really make that planning real?
Yeah, we've been clear with anybody who will listen to us that in order for us to get more close to normal in the fall, there can't be physical distancing requirements because our school systems don't have the money that would be needed, or potentially the facilities to hire enough teachers to reduce all class sizes down to a level where you could have students, whether it's 6 feet apart or 4 feet apart, whatever it is. We need to ensure that there are no physical distancing requirements in order to fully open our schools in the fall. We've looked at change, time and time again over the last year. I'm feeling very hopeful that right now the CDPH seems to be moving in the direction of a permanent relaxation of those physical distancing requirements. So it's making planning for the fall easier. What we'd really love is to have the crystal ball to know what will the local conditions be like in late August when we reopen again. Will the case counts still be low? Will the rates of transmission still be low? Will we, look kind of like what we look like today, where we feel that our strategies for keeping kids safe are effective? That's the challenge for superintendents, not knowing what the public health situation will look like. But I do believe we have a very good opportunity right now based on what the guidance is today. We have a very good chance to have the fall look much more normal, for lack of a better term.
Ben, Ann Egan Hubbard asks a question, and I want to take this through the lens of your district because obviously you do have a board meeting coming up later today. But she asked the question, are other districts considering expanded in-person instruction time this academic year due to the new guidelines, because they're getting lots of pressure from parents to increase immediately? Is this something that your school district has looked at or will begin looking at as you move forward through the rest of this academic year?
Yeah, my team has made a recommendation to our board that they'll be discussing this evening to return after spring break to a 5-day-a-week instructional model for middle schools and high schools. In discussion with my colleagues in other area districts, and I don't want to speak for them, but I do know that they are having the same discussions with their boards. So I think it's very likely that at least here in North San Diego County, that many of our schools will be back to a 4 or 5 day a week instructional model, most likely sometime in April.
Ben, let me ask you this question as well. Craig Gensler asks, what about eating in the classroom? Is 3 feet sufficient in a stable cohort of students, but 6 feet in the cafeteria? That is something that I think a lot of district administrators are going to have to confront, is how they go about some of those, I wouldn't say extracurricular, but just those activities of eating, maybe access to staff lounges, the library, that kind of thing. Is that another challenge that you guys are having to deal with, and something, even with Craig's question about stable cohorts, eating in the classroom, that you guys are going to have to confront?
Yeah, that's a great example of something that we're all working through right now. As I mentioned, our elementary school students have been back since September. They've been back in a 5 day a week model since late January. But we're still doing an early dismissal time with a grab and go lunch so that our students are not eating on campus. We're in a good position here in Southern California that our kids can eat outside. But what we found for our smaller elementary school sites is that we would have to have some groups of kids eating lunch at 9:30 and other groups of kids eating lunch at 1:30 if we staggered the lunch schedule throughout the day so that none of those stable groups were eating together at the same time. There's lots of ways to get creative about doing this, certainly, but we've taken the approach to date that, one, we don't want kids eating in classrooms, period. If they eat, they'll be outside. They need to be physically distanced at 6 feet. And CDC and CDPH both have recommendations about that. When masks are off, at minimum, you need to be 6 feet. And then, as I said, we've taken the approach where we've asked students just to eat off campus anyways. Moving into the new school year, again, it will depend on what are the local conditions, right? In our area, what are case rates and transmission rates looking like? And that'll help us to determine whether or not we do, how we structure lunch, when we structure lunch, and whether or not we need to add things like staff for distancing, additional areas to eat, et cetera.
I'll add on to a little bit about what Ben said here in terms of what the guidance stated and the CDPH guidance and CDC in terms of their recommendation is that, yeah, when kids don't have their masks on, the recommendation, and again, it's a recommendation, but this is per the science of what the study said, that distance needs to be 6 feet. I think it was Christine pointed out that her local public health department is actually issuing more guidance on how to deal with that situation if eating in closed spaces. Given that, and actually that reminds me an important piece that we haven't talked about yet. Even though the state guideline says 3 feet now, or strongly recommends 3 feet, you still have to be mindful of the county you're in, because this is a piece that is playing out that your local county health department could theoretically issue other requirements on that end. As in the pandemic has showed us, the state kind of sets the floor, if you will. But many times public health departments have tacked on additional requirements at the county level.
Ben, I'm going to try and summarize a couple of questions here because I think advice to other administrators is important. Pavel Escobedo Garcia asks about union requests and dynamics. We have Ann Hubbard asked about full days or reduced days. Let me just ask you, since you've been going through this, since you've been facing the challenges, seeing the successes and the challenges throughout this, what advice would you have to your fellow administrators out there that could help them through this process?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate that we've had strong relationships with our union partners throughout, and we've really relied on each other to work together to create the best outcomes for students. The advice that I would provide certainly is to invest in those relationships so that you can stand shoulder to shoulder as the guidance changes. We've seen it change weekly. We've seen it change by the day. Have a good common understanding of what your ultimate goals are, and you can work together. We were intentional as we negotiated some of our MOUs with our unions that we've always deferred to CDPH requirements. And so that's made it a little easier for us to pivot as things have changed, right? We haven't written into any of our agreements, a specific number of feet between students. We've said we'll defer to whatever the requirements are in the CDPH docs. So that's been helpful, that each time CDPH changes something, we haven't had to renegotiate a letter of agreement on things like distancing. I certainly know that, we're all in a different position when it comes to historical relationships with our union partners, and I realize that it's really noisy out there. There's a lot of anger after a year of school closures, and I think the end is near. I think the light at the end of the tunnel is shining more brightly, and I would just encourage everybody to hang in there. We're going to get through this.
Before we go, Ben, a lot of our viewers know, for good or for bad, that I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and I know that your background includes DePaul University, Valparaiso. I know that you're a Bears fan as well. Let me just ask you this. Your evaluation of the current situation with the Bears and their quarterback situation, because I will say this. For some reason, Russell Wilson became Andy Dalton sometime last week, which doesn't pave the way for me to feel good about what's coming up for this team.
Russell Wilson sounded outstanding as an option at quarterback for the Chicago Bears. Andy Dalton, that confirms what I know about the Bears, which is they are not going to the Super Bowl anytime soon.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Ben Churchill, Superintendent, Carlsbad Unified School District. Ben, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I saw your blood pressure, Naj, just going up. As soon as you dove into the Bears question, I saw your facial expression change. I feel bad for you, man.
Hey, look, you know what? I mean, 30 some years of being a Bears fan, you're just kind of used to it. Hey, as we cross the bottom of the hour here, I want to remind you folks, Ledge Action Day coming up April 12th and 13th. We have a very, very exciting lineup for you. It is a free event. Here's a preview of some of what you can expect during Ledge Action Day. Legislative Action Day, April 12th and 13th. This is a free event. We start in the morning. We end right around lunchtime. It's like Edgar and I on steroids for 2 days. Edgar, this is an incredible lineup that we have got coming up. Let me just go ahead and give these to you. In addition to some advocacy tips, learning about priorities, learning about your opportunity to go and advocate on behalf of leadership and for students, we have an incredible lineup of guests that are going to be coming on. And I would like to, pat you on the back. But I know you and your staff have been working hard on this. Joining us in very similar format to what we have here, question and answer interactive sessions, Senators Connie Leyva and John Laird, Assembly members Kevin McCarty and Patrick O'Donnell. SPI Tony Thurmond is going to be here. He's joined us on this show a couple of times. I have to imagine, Edgar, that the seat at the table that we were talking about at the top of the show is really boosting the opportunities for lawmakers to come on here and interact with our members.
Yeah, I mean, the members have said yes very, very quickly, actually. They see our members, and it's not because of us. And a huge kudos goes out to my team who's been hustling on doing all of the logistics on this, as well as your team, Naj. But I think it's a testament to folks are understanding that the policymakers, especially when you just named off the 4 or 5 members, those are all the key folks in education, the budget subcommittee chairs, the education committee chairs. They all said yes to us, and it's because they know that it's important to come before our members. So I'm excited about the event.
I this year I am so excited, especially because we didn't have Ledge Action Day last year. To be able to come back this year with this kind of lineup, with the opportunity to interact with these lawmakers, opportunities for all of our viewers to interact. We know at this point, more than 500 ACSA members have registered for the event. And don't think that Edgar and I won't come on here the next time we're on with a list of those who have not signed up that are regular participants on this show. So get yourself registered for that. It's a free event. Also, just want to let you know, we are not on the air next week because Wes told us that we have to actually take an afternoon off. Edgar, I'm shocked that we're allowed to do that.
We'll see if it actually happens to turn into a day off. I mean, our folks, and I know it's spring break for a lot of schools, so hopefully our members are taking at least a little bit of time to exhale amongst all of the activity, whether it be this week, next week. I know it's spaced out. So hopefully our members are getting a little bit of the well-deserved rest. We'll see what happens next week. Something tells me there'll be something popping up that, that gets in the way of that. But we'll be back in a few weeks.
The governor has a way of having some type of newsworthy announcement at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. I'm surprised we didn't get the AG announcement while we've been sitting here doing this. That's So folks, not on air next week unless we do have some breaking news for you. Edgar, good seeing you. Good show today.
It's fun as always, Naj. See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're back here in 2 Wednesdays with more for you, live and interactive. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see you next time.